In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel attacked a U.S. ship off the coast of Sinai, the USS Liberty, believing it to be an Egyptian warship. At least, that's the official government story. Now, decades later, without any new evidence emerging, some people are claiming we were lied to, that Israel knew that they were attacking an American ship, that America also knew and deliberately covered it up. Why? Well, we'll get into the theories, but more importantly today, I'm showing you what the evidence actually says. Welcome back. We'll see how long this video is today. I planned on keeping it short, but it may take a while to really dive into this, give you the information you need, and address the questions raised by people who constantly bring up this attack. This video is for people who have heard the talking points and are genuinely curious. It's not for the hardcore Groypers who decided their conclusion the moment they first heard about the USS Liberty 3 months ago. And it's not for the people who are emotionally invested in defending Israel no matter what. Maybe you've seen a few clips, maybe you've heard that Israel attacked us on purpose, and you're wondering whether that's true. What you're going to get from me is an honest walkthrough. I'll point out the parts that are still unclear and the parts that may sound a bit fishy, but I'm not coming into this looking for a prepackaged answer. Because, quite frankly, whatever conclusion you or I land on doesn't address the real point that those bringing this up are getting at. Because I don't think that a single incident from 1967, false flag operation or not, should dictate American foreign policy in 2025, especially when we're talking about a country that has since become one of America's closest allies. So with that, let's get into it. Now, the reason I'm making this video today is because of a clip that went viral from AmFest this past weekend. A young guy stepped up to the mic and tried to corner Ben Shapiro with a question about the USS Liberty. Here's how that went.
You cited during your speech truth as the most important tenet of American conservatism. Why, therefore, did you call irrelevant the Israeli attack in 1967 on the USS Liberty, which left dozens of American servicemen dead and hundreds wounded?
So what I actually said is that if we're looking at modern Israeli-American relations, looking at an attack that happened mistakenly by multiple Navy reports, multiple Israeli reports, and all available evidence, and using that attack in order to undermine today's relations between Israel and America, that's irrelevant. As irrelevant as it would be to cite a piece of evidence from World War II or from 1776 to define America's relations with, for example, Great Britain or Germany today. That does not mean that the attack wasn't horrible for the Americans involved, that it wasn't bloody and terrible. The Israeli government paid reparations to the people who were killed. If you look at the actual military record of what happened on the USS Liberty, it was clearly a mistaken and tragic attack. The people who frequently cite the USS Liberty, however, are not talking about the specifics of the USS Liberty. I suspect that the vast majority of people who bring this up are doing so in order to suggest that Israel deliberately attacked an American ship because Israel deliberately wants to harm America. It is connected generally with a larger point. I wonder if that's your point.
If the truth matters, then the Israeli government must be held accountable for that attack. The American flag was flying on that ship. You do not mistake an American ship for a foreign one when our flag is flying.
So, we can spend the rest of the time talking about the specifics of the U.S. Liberty attack, or you can actually go look at the naval investigations that were done, multiple naval investigations that were done. The reality is that people were flying Mirage planes for the Israeli military at the time. The USS Liberty was sailing in an area where it had essentially gone off-grid. The Israeli military mistook it for an Egyptian ship. They thought it was shelling Al-Arish, which happened not to be true. In the initial attack, the American flag was knocked down, and then the attack went on for about 90 minutes. And then, as soon, you can hear this, by the way, on the tapes of the Israeli pilots talking to each other, as soon as they realize that it's an American ship, they call off the attack, they speed a ship to try and help the USS Liberty. There have been multiple unfortunate friendly fire incidents between Allied forces, including, for example, in the Gulf War, where U.S. forces were responsible for killing about 9 British troops during the Gulf War. It's an unfortunate reality of war, but you're not answering my question, which is, what is your broader agenda in asking the question? Because I suspect that your question is not limited to your specific ire over an incident that happened in 1967.
I think we should question any foreign country's relationship with our government.
That's totally fine, but I'm just wondering why you
serve American interests.
Again, I'm perfectly fine with questioning any country's relationship with the United States. But again, I'm wondering what your motivation is in bringing up a 6-decade-old attack as though it is the #1 issue in assessing the relationship between Israel and the United States today.
Well, many problems persist to this day, but it's interesting that you say 6-decade-old incident when there are many people in this audience who were alive for that attack, as if this is something that's irrelevant.
Well, no, it's just not particularly relevant to assessing the relationship between the United States and Israel today, in the same way that in 1967, there are a wide variety of countries with which the United States had different relations. Okay, it's clear you're not going to actually answer the question, so I'm happy to move to this one.
Now, you might be wondering why Ben started questioning this kid's motive. He did that because this question isn't random. It has become a scripted talking point for Groypers, the followers of Nick Fuentes, generally young, so-called conservative white men. They don't bring up the USS Liberty because they're deeply concerned about naval history or because they want to honor the survivors. No, instead they use it as a wedge. Sometimes it's a wedge to argue against aid to Israel, but often it's just a way to signal a deeper hostility towards Jewish people under the guise of just asking questions. They'll tell you it's about America first foreign policy, but when you look at their obsession with figures like Ben and their constant distortions of what Ben believes, it's pretty clear that Israel aid is just a smokescreen for a different kind of hatred. Ben absolutely dismantled the argument, as you saw, but the kid then started doing interview after interview, posting himself all over social media, claiming that Ben lied, that he, the kid, knows the truth, and that he's speaking for millions of young men. But if you watch him in any of those clips, you do not see an independent thinker. You see someone reciting a script. Everything this kid does is entirely rehearsed. But seeing his performances, yes, he's putting on a performance, made me want to go deeper than the viral clips. I want to know the truth about the USS Liberty. Not the Groyper script, not the Ben Shapiro script, but the actual historical facts. Because, as I said, I don't care, quite frankly, whether it was intentional or not. I don't think what happened in 1967 should dictate foreign policy today. So I dug in. It was June 8th, 1967. Israel was on day 4 of the Six-Day War, having launched the war against their Arab neighbors preemptively because they learned that those countries were gearing up to attack Israel. By this point in the war, Israel had achieved complete air superiority over the region and was cruising to an easy victory. That context is crucial for later, but here are the basics of the attack itself. The morning of the attack, explosions rocked the town of El Arish in Israel. Israeli command panicked, believing that the explosion came from a warship. They scanned the water and found one lone gray ship off the coast. Believing that this was the enemy vessel that fired upon El Arish, Israel dispatched 3 torpedo boats and fighter jets to intercept. The planes got there first, and they strafed the ship with cannons, rockets, and napalm. The air attack continued for about 10 to 15 minutes until a pilot noticed symbols on the ship inconsistent with an Egyptian ship. But the torpedo boats did not get that message. The boat commander misidentified the ship as the Egyptian ship El Qusair. They attempted to send a signal to the ship, supposedly, but the USS Liberty crew fired on them. I guess whoever fired is still in contention. The torpedo boat commander said that they were fired upon first. The USS Liberty crew says that they were fired upon first. But it really doesn't matter, because even if the Liberty did fire first, they had just been attacked a few minutes prior by planes, so it would make total sense why they would fire upon the torpedo boats. Either way, the torpedo boat launched torpedoes. One of them struck the starboard side of the Liberty and killed 25 U.S. servicemen. And that was that. That was the final shot from either side. As the Israeli boats moved closer to assess the damage, they finally saw the hull clearly and realized that it was an American ship. They immediately ceased hostilities and offered assistance. Okay. That's like the 30,000-foot view, so to speak. An explosion in Israel, one ship out on the water, an attack, and immediate cessation of fire once the mistake was realized. But let's drill down even further, because to understand why some people argue about this today, we need to look at the specific timeline, minute by minute, starting with what happened early that morning. At 5:45 a.m., an Israeli reconnaissance plane spots the ship. The Israelis initially identified it as a destroyer, but then corrected it to a U.S. supply ship. Then, at 9 a.m., an Israeli jet pilot flies overhead and correctly identifies the ship as the USS Liberty, traveling west away from the area. The Israeli Naval War Room in Tel Aviv receives the report and places a green marker on their control board, indicating that the ship is neutral. But here's the fatal flaw that occurred. Around 11 a.m., the Israelis removed that marker from the board. This is the fodder for a lot of the conspiracy theories. They will combine the fact that survivors report seeing Israeli planes flying overhead in the morning and the removal of the green marker as proof that Israel was planning on attacking the USS Liberty. But here's the thing. The removal of the marker was standard practice, but a dumb move at the time, a mistake. Israeli Captain Abraham Lunds, the Israeli tracking officer, ended his shift at 11. According to the official investigations, it was standard operating procedure to clean up stale data before he left. His report was that the Liberty was moving west at 15 knots, so he assumed that the ship had left the area. And because his information was wrong, and the ship was actually going in a box pattern at only 5 knots, but he took off the marker thinking that the ship was long gone based on his faulty information. And this brings us to another point. Some survivors claim that they saw Israeli planes up to 8 different times before the attack, but I only laid out 2 events. Now, there were other times Israeli ships may have flown over, but they would have been off on their own mission, not there to report back on any ships, not low enough to even identify the ship. So while the crew may have seen more than 2 Israeli planes throughout the day, only those 2 reported back anything about the USS Liberty. And both of those planes were before 11 a.m. when the green marker was removed from the board. Okay, so now about 25 minutes after the marker was removed, an explosion was reported in the town of El Arish. Israeli command assumed that they were being shelled from the sea. Now, this is another source of contention for the Groypers, because, in fact, Israel was not being shelled from the sea. They were wrong about it, and we still don't actually know where this explosion came from, so that's a little bit fishy. But the fact is that this was a war, and Israeli officers weren't going to wait for some forensic audit to determine the source of the explosion, especially not when they look out at the sea and can spot the silhouette of a naval ship 14 miles off. To them, that was confirmation that a ship just shot at Israel. So, like I said, they knew a ship was about 14 miles out. And remember, the tracking officer left his post at 11 a.m. and was replaced by whoever worked the next shift. That new tracking officer would not have known about the USS Liberty because the previous officer acted on bad information and removed the marker that they had. So they thought that what they saw was a new ship, an Egyptian ship, out at sea shelling Israel. At noon, just over 30 minutes after the explosions, 3 torpedo boats were dispatched from Ashdod, about 65 miles away from El Arish, to intercept and identify what they believed to be the enemy ship. Despite what the Groypers say, there's no evidence that these ships were ordered to attack the ship, and they were not followed by Israeli Air Force fighters. At 1:41 p.m., the torpedo boats finally picked up the USS Liberty on radar. Of course, at this time, they couldn't tell who it was. The officer in charge miscalculated the speed of the Liberty twice, the first time saying it was going 30 knots, the second time saying 28 knots. The miscalculation is another critical error, as only ships moving at 20 knots or greater are considered active warships. According to A.J. Crystal's comprehensive investigation of the incident, this type of speed calculation was a known problem with 1967 radar tech. Even the U.S. had technology problems in that time period, evidenced by the USS Maddox committing a different but not totally dissimilar error in the second attack in the Gulf of Tonkin incident just a few years prior. Anyways, after the miscalculation of speed, the commander thought they wouldn't be able to catch up to the ship that they thought was running away from them. So an air assault was called for at 1:51. The planes that arrived had been doing reconnaissance work over the Suez Canal, armed with 30mm cannons and possibly Sidewinder missiles, although it's unclear if they actually had those on the planes. The planes got to the Liberty at 1:58, and the first air assault lasted 4 minutes until 2:02. And you'll hear people claim that the Israeli pilots would have seen the American flag. And I'm not saying that the flag wasn't raised. I'm not saying that the flag couldn't have been visible. But here's the facts. The ship was steaming downwind, meaning that the smoke from its own stack was likely obscuring the view of the flag from above. The pilots were in fighter jets going God knows how fast. They were told an enemy ship is fleeing, and there's only one ship in the area. And after the first shot hit, there was likely smoke from any explosions that also would have obscured the view of the flag. According to NSA declassified intercepts, the pilots themselves didn't know whose ship they were attacking. One pilot is heard asking, "What ship is this?" while another responds saying that it's the enemy ship. And look, you could claim that the pilots should have checked if they had questions. But put yourselves in their shoes for a moment. You are told to go attack an enemy ship. You fly out, there's only one ship on the water. It's a safe bet that that is the enemy ship you are supposed to go after. Add in the smoke from the stack and subsequent fires, and I don't think that the flag issue is the huge thing that the Groypers are making it out to be. Anyways, the planes fly back and get reloaded. This time they're armed with 30mm cannons and 4 canisters of napalm. Why napalm? According to the declassified IAF transcripts, an Israeli ground controller had the exact same question, asking, "What can napalm do?" And this exchange, documented in Israeli military records, shows that this attack was not planned out well in advance. As I said, they ordered the airstrike at 1:51 p.m. 7 minutes later, the planes were there. 5 minutes after that, they were back, being reloaded with whatever was on the ground. The truth is that napalm doesn't do much to ships. It can start fires, but fires will quickly be put out and won't spread the way that they would elsewhere. It just wasn't a well-planned attack, so they used whatever they had on hand at the moment. Okay, so the ships go out a second time. This time, one of the pilots notices markings inconsistent with Egyptian ships. As soon as he noticed this, he reported it, and the attack was immediately halted, at 2:11 p.m. The NSA intercepts and the pilot testimony shows that the moment there was doubt, the firing stopped. If the goal was to sink the ship, as the Groypers say, they would not have stopped there. Now, remember those torpedo boats? Well, they arrived about 14 minutes after the plane attack ended, and they had yet to receive the message that the pilots had reported uncertainty about the target's identity. And this was actually my biggest problem while doing this research. I didn't understand how the boats wouldn't have known what the planes had discovered. But the explanation is honestly quite simple. 1967 technology in 1967 military communications protocol. The Israeli Navy and Air Force operated on separate radio frequencies from different bases. If they needed to coordinate, they had to relay messages through command centers. Plus, and this is important, the pilots reported confusion and uncertainty, not a definitive, hey, this isn't an Egyptian ship. Now, it wasn't a clear order, it was ambiguous chatter in the middle of a battle. So in the chaos, critical information moved slowly between the Air Force and the Navy. So without that key information, the torpedo boat Commander Oren, I believe his name was, saw the burning ship through the smoke and misidentified it as the Egyptian transport El Qusair. And yes, the Groypers will tell you that the USS Liberty was almost twice the size of the El Qusair. That is true. In a textbook, you never confuse them, but in a battle from 6,000 yards away, when you're looking into the sun at a silhouette covered in smoke and fire listing to one side, and you see that your own Air Force has already treated it as an enemy, that's not a reasonable assumption to make on Oren's part. It was negligent, yes, but negligence is not a conspiracy. So now, the next part is hazy. No side admits to striking first. Some say that the USS Liberty spotted the torpedo boats and fired. And look, if they did, that makes sense. They just survived one attack from the air. It makes sense that they would fire at other attackers from the sea. Other accounts say that the Israeli torpedo boats fired first. And from their perspective, that also makes sense. You see a burning ship, you think it's an Egyptian warship, it's not sinking. You were sent there to find out who it is, and you get there and see that your team already attacked it once. So you fire on it to finish it off for good. It makes sense. But either way, the fact is that a torpedo from the Israeli torpedo boat hit the starboard side of the USS Liberty, and that strike alone killed 25 crewmen. And this all happened at about 2:35. At 2:41, the Israeli boat ceased fire. As they got closer, they realized that the boat was not Egyptian. The IAF logs show that the torpedo boat crewmen thought that the boat actually may have been Russian. Now, a few minutes later, they saw the Latin markings and realized that it was American. At 3:03, they approached the Liberty and offered assistance. Within the hour, Israel notified the United States of what they did, and then later paid out millions in reparations to the families of those lost or injured. So, when you look at the timeline minute by minute, the conspiracy kind of starts to fall apart. It wasn't a seamless all-day operation to sink a U.S. ship. It was a series of mistakes. A removed map marker, a panic over an explosion, a misidentification in the smoke, and in the end, a tragic friendly fire incident that ended the moment the mistake was realized. But if that's not enough, I have a few more specific talking points to refute. The first is that the Israelis machine-gunned life rafts in order to leave no witnesses. That's a horrific accusation, but it falls apart when you look at the sequence. During the air attack, the life rafts, which were strapped to the deck, caught fire from the napalm. The crew on the Liberty pushed the burning rafts overboard. The Israeli boats thought they might have been mines in the water, so they shot at them. But there's absolutely zero evidence that Israel targeted American survivors in the water. And again, if the goal is to leave no witnesses, why would the torpedo boat stop and offer medical aid? You don't massacre life rafts and then ask if anybody needs a doctor. Second, you'll hear all the time that Israel jammed U.S. distress frequencies. The investigation found that the Liberty was struggling to transmit for multiple reasons. Partly because of damaged equipment, yes, but also because of operator error. The operator had the wrong frequency dialed up and thus couldn't send out any signals that would be heard. Any buzzing noise that survivors report hearing is consistent with thermal noise and other interferences common for radios, especially in a war zone. The third myth is that LBJ recalled rescue planes because he wanted the ship to sink. Now, this one is pure conspiracy brain. Yes, planes were sent from the USS Saratoga, hundreds of miles away, at 2:09 p.m. Yes, those planes were recalled. But they were armed with, wait for it, nuclear weapons. They had been stationed in the Mediterranean, on standby because of the Cold War. You don't send nuclear-armed jets into a possibly chaotic war zone, where you don't know what's going on at all, without risking World War III with the Soviets. So they were recalled to rearm with conventional weapons. It was about preventing nuclear war, not helping Israel sink our ship. Plus, even if they hadn't been recalled, they wouldn't have arrived in time to stop the torpedo attack anyway. Fourth, they will claim that NSA tapes prove the Israelis knew. And that's just a flat-out lie. The declassified audio of the Israeli pilot shows them confused, asking, "What ship is this?" and then misidentifying it as Egyptian. The internet myth that there's a tape of a pilot saying, "But sir, it's American," and being told to fire anyway, that doesn't exist. It's a fabrication. The real tapes confirm the mistaken identity theory. I will play a bit of one of the tapes, but only a few seconds because, well, it's in a different language. So if you really want to listen, then go ahead and find them. They're on nsa.gov, as with essentially everything else we have on this attack. Now, look, some still argue that there are hidden logs where we can hear the Israeli pilot say that it's an American and then be told to fire on the ship anyway. But just for a second here, think about what that would mean. That would mean that a pilot saw a U.S. flag, radioed it in, and then a commander, upon learning it was the United States, instantly decided to go to war with the United States. And even if you say no, the commander knew all along that it was American, then think about what that would mean. Because that would mean that after telling his pilots to fire on the ship, he then told his pilots, "Okay, go back and attack again, but this time I want you to pretend that you don't know who it is. Act confused. Halfway through the attack, pretend to spot the flag for the first time and act surprised. And do all of it in a convincing voice while you're flying a fighter jet 400 miles per hour in a combat zone." Does that sound plausible to you? No? Me neither. It's more like a bad movie script. So that theory falls apart on its face. Now, finally, I need to step back and look at the big picture here, because even if you ignore the timeline, the tapes, the testimony, the idea that Israel would intentionally target the United States in 1967 makes zero strategic sense if you look at the geopolitics of the time. First off, you have to understand that Israel and the United States had a very different relationship back then. We were not the special allies that we are today. In 1967, Israel's military was largely supplied by France, not the United States. The jets that attacked the Liberty were French Mirage fighters. The U.S. actually had an arms embargo on the region at the time and was taking a strict wait-and-see approach. We didn't want to anger the oil-producing Arab states, and we certainly did not want to get dragged into a conflict that could pull in the Soviet Union. We had enough of those going on at the time. So why would Israel attack us? The conspiracy theory, the false flag theory, claims that Israel wanted to frame Egypt to drag U.S. into the war. Some Groypers will even claim that Israeli planes were painted with Egyptian markings, although even they can't agree on that. Some Groypers claim that survivors saw the Star of David on the planes. Other Groypers claim that they saw planes with Egyptian markings. Now, they can't keep their own conspiracy straight. And there's zero physical evidence or military record that Israel launched unmarked or Egyptian painted planes that day. And keep in mind, the planes had been on a mission over the Suez before being called to the Liberty. Israeli planes were all over the Sinai that day. It would not make sense for them to strip their planes of markings. Their own pilots needed to see them. But here's the real fatal flaw in the conspiracy theory. Israel did not need our help. By June 8th, day 4 of the war, Israel had already destroyed the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. They had total air superiority. They were crushing the Egyptian army in the Sinai. They were winning on every front. So why on earth would they launch a high-risk operation to attack a superpower, risking their very existence if they got caught, just to help in a war that they were already winning? It makes no sense. The risk was infinite, and the reward was zero. And finally, look what happened after the attack. If the U.S. government secretly believed that Israel had just tried to mass murder American sailors, the rational response would have been to cut all ties, impose sanctions, or worse. Instead, the U.S.-Israel alliance grew stronger in the years that followed. That only happens if the people at the top, LBJ, the CIA, the Pentagon, the people who actually saw the raw intelligence, concluded that it was a tragic mistake. The declassified CIA analysis from the period confirms this assessment, and it should be noted that the timeline laid out by both the US and Israel's separate investigations were nearly the exact same. Anyways, for our allyship with Israel, it grew stronger after the Liberty attack because the United States probably recognized Israel's military dominance during the war and decided that Israel was a strategic asset against the Soviets. The United States did not cover up a crime. They accepted the reality of a friendly fire accident and moved on. And look, one of the reasons that I avoided this topic for so long is that I fundamentally don't believe an incident from 1967 should dictate foreign policy in 2025. It is historically illiterate to suggest otherwise. But let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say that the Groypers are right. Let's say we were lied to and that in 1967, for some inexplicable reason, Israel attacked a U.S. ship on purpose. Even that wildest case scenario doesn't make sense to sever our alliance today. And the answer is no. Because in the nearly 60 years since then, Israel has proven itself to be perhaps our most valuable strategic asset in the entire world. First, intelligence. Israel provides the U.S. with real-time, high-level intelligence on terrorism, cyber threats, and weapons development in the Middle East. This intelligence saves American lives and saves us billions of dollars. They act as a forward operating base for Western interests in a neighborhood we have very few real friends. And no, Tucker Carlson Qatar is not our real friend. We cannot be friends with people who simultaneously fund terrorism while gifting the president the nicest jet imaginable. The bottom line is this: if you don't understand the value of Israeli intelligence, you aren't serious about national security. Second, technology. From missile defense systems like Iron Dome to advanced cybersecurity, Israeli R&D has directly enhanced American military capabilities. No other ally punches so far above its weight in tech transfer. Third, the lightning rod effect. Israel's on the front lines fighting the same radical ideologies that target the West. If Israel didn't exist, much of that ire and violence would be focused directly on the United States and our other allies in Europe. And this next point is admittedly a bit milder one because it's essentially a neocon W. Bush era argument that I think is silly. But they are the only true democracy in the region, a bastion of Western values in a region full of chaos, authoritarianism, slavery, and terrorism. They have done and continue to do so much for the United States that it would be strategic suicide to throw it all away because of a contested incident from 1967. Now think about the standard we apply to other nations. We don't base our alliance with Germany on World War II. We don't refuse to trade with Japan because of Pearl Harbor. To give a more recent incident, we didn't break ties with Iraq after an Iraqi jet killed 37 American soldiers on the USS Stark in 1987. We still supported Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War. We accepted that friendly fire and fog of war tragedies happen. And yes, it is a tragedy every time. I pray for the lives lost on the Liberty and their families. I pray for the survivors who had to witness that, who've had to live with that terrible day for 60 years now. I don't blame them for blaming Israel for wanting something done to punish Israel for it. It makes sense for them to say that. But for us to truly honor the victims, we have to tell the truth about what happened, not use their deaths as a political weapon. It means actually looking at the documents, the recordings, the transcripts with an open eye. It does not mean accepting the talking points simply because you don't like Israel or because you think Jews run the world or something. So my plea to you is this: look at the facts, look at the primary sources. When you see a sudden, coordinated online campaign to revive a 60-year-old incident as a political weapon, be suspicious. Ask why they are pushing this now. There will always be an ulterior motive. And look, you may review the evidence and still have questions. That's fine, I do too. Rational people can disagree on the details of history. All of this information is available on the NSA website. But I promise you that the people sprouting this deliberate attack narrative haven't looked very deep. They rely on out-of-context clips and emotional documentaries made decades later, while ignoring the sworn testimony, the radio logs, the official Israeli Yefe report, our own House Armed Services Committee findings, the NSA intercepts from the day it happened, and even sworn testimony of the survivors during the Naval Court of Inquiry, all of which is publicly available. So don't be like them. Don't settle for the easy, sometimes hateful narrative. Always dig deeper, always check the source, and be willing to stand for the truth, even when the internet mob is screaming something else. If you don't think that we should give aid to Israel, that's a policy debate we can have. But make that argument based on 2025 realities, not a 1967 conspiracy theory. Thanks for sticking around and watching. Hit like and subscribe if you learned something. I know that I did during this investigation. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think this was deliberate? And more importantly, should events from 60 years ago dictate foreign policy today? And I know last week I idiotically said that Nebraska volleyball looked unbeatable, and then they lost that very same day to A&M. Well, my fiance's family are A&M fans, so I went down with my fiance to Kansas City to watch A&M win the championship, so that was a decent consolation prize if Nebraska wasn't going to win it all. Anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. Thank you.